Everybody. Listen, thank you so much for asking me to come on and do this. This is an incredible experience that you've got going on here for people from all over the world to be able to get together and talk about this really important topic, where I think that there's a lot of information and education and just resource sharing that we don't get to see or do simply because I think every house that does ECMO has kind of their own way of doing things. And those of us who are at the bedside or have been at the bedside with the patients specifically, you know, we really need to hear more about experiences that other people have, what's worked, what doesn't work. And so today, I'm going to share my screen here with you. Let's see if I can make this actually happen. While I don't have kids, I may have a cat that may jump on the screen here and decide that they don't want me to be doing this. Let's see what happens. All right, so it's part of that. Let me see if I can get this one going. And all right, I'm almost there, I promise. All right, let's try this one. And all right. So I see, there we go. Aha, you can see it, perfect. Okay, so what I'm gonna talk a little bit about today is the utilization of Impella and ECMO. So just a little bit about me. I've been a critical care nurse for about 20 years, heart transplants, all sorts of ventricular assist devices. My disclaimer is I do work for Abiomed, I'm an employee. However, I'm not really here today as an Abiomed employee. I'm here today as an RN. I'm here today as a critical care nurse and a patient advocate. This has been my only industry job, and I joined it in 2009, and I hope this to be my last industry job. So I'm an RN first, I'm a patient advocate, and I believe in patients first. And that's the way that I've lived my life as long as I've been with Abiomed. So here's some questions that I was asked to kind of talk about, and that is you know, first, what is Impella? Second is how and when should we use Impella with ECMO? What are the positive effects using Impella with VA ECMO? What are some watchouts? And then what about weaning from VA ECMO to Impella? You know, can you do that? Should you do it? And what circumstances do we have? Just real briefly, Impella is what we call a platform technology, and there are multiple Impellas that are available. We started off with the Impella 2.5, and now we have the Impella 5.5, which is a surgical device implanted axillary artery. And all of this is a platform technology, which means it runs off the same device. How are these implanted? Well, there's femoral percutaneous implanted devices, which can be deployed really quick in the cath lab, anywhere from 7 to 8, 9 minutes. It goes over a wire with the inflow that actually sits in the left ventricle. The outflow sits in the aorta and directly unloads the left ventricle using this little microaxial pump, perfusing and infusing the coronaries and end organs through the entire cardiac cycle. Then we also have something that we can utilize for the right heart called the RP. That's a venous inserted in the right femoral vein that goes up, crosses the pulmonic valve, actually sits with the outflow in the left pulmonary artery. The inflow sits in the IVC. So this will give you 4 liters of flow unloading the right ventricle. And then we have the device that I think one of the 2 devices that is most used in the unloading is the axillary implantation of either the 5-liter device or our 5.5 device. These are placed through an axillary graft, which really is, I think, kind of the device you want to think about using if you're going to unload. Again, sits and can give us up to 5.5, almost 6 liters with the 5.5. And the beauty is that this device allows your patients to be able to get up and ambulate. So what does this Impella do? So this slide here looks kind of busy, but this is what we call the money slide. This tells us everything that Impella actually does. Where the inflow is sitting in the ventricle, it actually directly decreases the pressure and volume, decreases the mechanical workload, the wall tension, and I'm going to put a big circle around microvasculature resistance, because it reduces that microvasculature resistance, and it also increases this O2 supply and decreases the demand. On the outside, on the outflow part, which sits above the aortic valve, this is continuous flow. So it increases your mean arterial pressure and increases the flow. And it also increases something called cardiac power output, which turns out that's really one of the biggest indicators for in-hospital mortality for AMI shock patients. So this is what the device actually does, right? And it's and the Impella CP sits on a 9 French catheter and with a 14 French cannula. There are two indications for Impella. One is called the protected PCI, but the one that we're going to focus on is obviously the cardiogenic shock, because this is where the kind of this symbiotic relationship that's come in between Impella and ECMO, affectionately known as ECpella, right? So cardiogenic shock traditional therapies, we all know that's been our inotropes, vasopressors, and balloon pump. We've all learned in school that, where there's a magic number that we have to reach, and that on the mean arterial pressure, and that's going to be that MAP above 60. And that's what we would typically try to do with these particular devices, with chemically as well as with a balloon pump. Unfortunately, for about 20 plus years, we haven't really seen a tremendous change in our outcomes in patients with cardiogenic shock. We've been at about a 50% mortality, with data showing that even when we got these patients out of the bed and we were all happy as ICU nurses high-fiving each other, turns out about 10% of these folks are actually dying 60 days out once they got home. So some docs who are pretty smart got together and said, let's take a look and see what the therapy is that we're doing, and can we improve upon it? Well, Dr. Samuels, who's a cardiac transplant surgeon, took a look in the STS data bank. A lot of us are familiar with this. We see that when we have...
L-am ascultat pe la un timp pe Bogdan Timar, dar nu mai știu, mi s-a rupt filmul.
We have 21% mortality, 2 is 42%, and 3 is 80% mortality. Well, as an ICU nurse, I don't think any of us really needed a study to tell us that the more IV pumps we have in the room, the worse state we're going to have. But what this did was it gave Dr. Samuels the opportunity to get an algorithm of when he was going to put in those great big VADs. The heart. Then they took a look at the balloon pumps, which there had really never been like a full FDA randomized controlled trial on balloon pumps. So in Europe, they did a couple of trials. One was the Shock 1, the other was Shock 2. And in the Shock 2 trial, they found some really interesting data regarding not really seeing a benefit between whether you're using medical management or adding a balloon pump to it, which changed the classification for Europe and even Japan. So some folks got together, Dr. Bill O'Neill in particular, who is one of our what we call principal investigators to create something called door to balloon time, which is really institutionalized now. And what he did was he said, let's look at this Impella thing and see what's out there, what the data looks like in the cardiogenic shock arena. And he found three different tiers here. One, he found that when a shock patient came in and they did a PCI and put an Impella in, their survival looked like they were going to be about 39.5%. Now, this is all the Impella 2.5 data, and this was a while ago from using our registry. Those are not very good numbers, right? So we looked at putting a balloon pump in first. This was the second tier, doing the PCI, opening up the vessel, then switching out with an Impella. Those numbers still didn't look very good. They're 41.5%. But what he found really interesting was that when they placed an Impella first before the PCI, remember, this is the gentleman who was instrumental in doing door to balloon time. They did the PCI, they continued the Impella. They saw at this point a 65.1% improvement in survival. And this started everybody thinking, okay, what's this whole thing about unloading, direct unloading? Why is this making a difference? So if we go back to this slide and we see, well, what is it that this device is doing? Well, it's directly unloading the ventricle, unloading the volume, and it's decreasing the wall tension and decreasing this microvasculature resistance. So when we think about the heart, I know this is a terrible looking picture, but it kind of gives me gets the point across. When we think about the heart, we think about the coronary arteries. And if you're a cath lab nurse, you can name every single one of those little squiggles, right? You got RCA, you got your LAD, your left main, PAD, OM, all they have names for every single one of them. This is what we think of when we think about the heart. But in reality, this is more of what our heart actually is. It's this incredible network of microvasculature that's fed by our coronary arteries. So when you think about that, when you get an infarct, when you have an infarcted left ventricle that's hurt and the heart is not working, so remember, I think of this in terms of right heart and left heart, right? We have two pumps, a right heart and a left heart. Well, if the left heart is hurt, the right heart is still working and it's filling up that left heart that's hurt and not doing its job the way it's supposed to. So we kind of think about this as a balloon, right? So this is our left heart. Our right heart is filling and it's filling and it's filling. Well, think about that microvasculature. What's happening? Well, the microvasculature is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So now even if there's backflow or flow going into the coronaries, how's it going to get into that myocardium? And I know we're all waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. And this is what's going to happen. Hopefully this doesn't happen to your heart, right? Exactly, right? So when we look at the actual Impella, how does that translate into like medical terminology? What are we thinking about? Well, if you look at this slide, on this top slide here, what you're going to see is this is what we call a gamma camera. And this is the perfusion of a left ventricle that's been infarcted. This is the area down here that's hypoperfused. In this patient, all they did was put the Impella in and turn it on, and look at what happened to the apex here. You can see the perfusion area, right? That's happened. So the direct unloading of this ventricle, you can see how it actually made this big difference in the perfusion of an area that had not even been, they hadn't even done a procedure or a PCI on it yet. So Dr. O'Neill and a bunch of really smart doctors all got together and they started writing protocols for cardiogenic shock. And those protocols included, of course, VA ECMO. And how does VA ECMO get included in these algorithms? Well, when you have patients who are both, biventricular failure patients, just using a device that's unloading the left ventricle is not going to do it. So when they did these protocols, this is kind of like before what we were talking about. As you can see in 1993, if you were diagnosed with cardiogenic shock, you were pretty much, 1973, you're pretty much done, right? But from 1988 all the way through 2017, you can see we've got that 50% kind of margin going on with survival. Once the National Cardiogenic Shock Initiative came into being and we started utilizing actual protocols to protocolize the medicine and the treatment of these shock patients, we started to see an improvement for the first time ever. And this is literally the reason 12 years ago that I went to work for Abiomed, because I knew that being able to rapidly deploy this device would make a difference. And we've been able to do that with VA ECMO as well now with the cannulation and the smaller devices. The Innova system in West Virginia has been able to increase to 82%. And what's really notable here is in 2020, this Japanese registry has come out. When they approved Impella for cardiogenic shock 3 years ago, they followed the National Cardiogenic Shock-like algorithms, and they have a to date 77% survival. So how does this marry into our VA ECMO and unloading? Well, we know that VA ECMO has been on the increase, and I think it's probably because we've gotten a lot better at being able to place the devices quicker. The devices are smaller, they're more portable, and there's more awareness of the fact that when a patient is in biventricular failure, you have to support that whole patient. But when we look at the outcomes, maybe our outcomes still haven't been as good as where we needed them to be or would like them to be. So why is that? And why maybe with that LV infarcted patient, why is this maybe not helping in a longer term strategy? And it could be, as you can see here, this is fairly well-known images where you can see how on that retrograde flow, the LV, it's how the stasis of the blood is there, and that LV is not ejecting. So how do we, what is it that we're doing in order to be able to help that heart, particularly that left heart, when we've got that blood? And as Enrique was talking about, we have stasis inside the LV, we've got thrombus that can form, we've got pulmonary congestion that can happen. So there are multiple ways that we can look at actually unloading. When we see the effects of just ECMO on the left ventricle, we know that it can load that LV. But when you add a direct unloading support device, now we kind of see the benefits of both worlds. We can have a patient who, when we come into the cath lab, we know they're in cardiogenic shock. We go in, we can do VA ECMO, stabilize that patient. And then after the patient is stabilized, either you can place the 5-liter device, or you can place a CP, or oftentimes what will happen is they'll place a CP device primary and then realize that there's a significant amount of right heart failure, go ahead and put VA ECMO in place and turn the Impella down and allow the right heart to rest along with the left heart. And as I love PV loops as well, and Enrique was showing these. When you've got ECMO and Impella, and you get both effects of the benefits of having VA ECMO along with the Impella unloading. This is something I want to bring to the attention of folks. A lot of people may know what this is, but if you don't, go online, download the app. It's called Harvey. It has some tremendous hemodynamic chapter and books. It's a living book. As well as its primary author is Dr. Dan Burkhoff. It also has a really cool app. So this Harvey app allows us to be able to go in and play with different types of hemodynamic scenarios where you can actually watch the pressure volume loop, right? And you can move around and actually change what you're going to do to your patient. If this were your patient, right? You can model a patient. You can say, okay, this is a patient I had. Let's see if we can recreate the scenario. You can give them a heart attack by occluding their coronary arteries. You can put medications, dopamine, milrinone, epi, and all kinds of stuff. But this here allows you to actually put circulatory support devices on your patient. So right now, what I'd like for you to do is take a look on your hemodynamics over here. One of the thing that I think is important to look is the pressure volume area and the MVO2, which is the oxygen consumption. What we're going to do now, this is preloaded as an acute chronic heart failure patient. What we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to add ECMO. As you see, what Enrique also showed was that the pressure volume loop is actually moving. You can see it moving and getting further to the right. Look at the pressure volume area now. The pressure volume area has gone up, has increased, as well as the oxygen consumption for this heart has also gone up. What we're going to do now is take a look and place an Impella in this patient. We'll put a 5-liter device. We'll save this as we did here. And now as we turn this other device on, which is an Impella, the transaortic device, we're going to see what happens to the actual pressure volume loop. Now you notice the volume loop is moving down. What does that mean? That means that the pressure volume area is actually decreasing. The oxygen consumption is decreasing. And of course, the mean arterial pressure is up, right? But this means that our heart is actually working less. So it's working less hard. So the green was where we started with our heart failure patient. This purple was actually the ECMO only, and now we just added the device. So what happens now? So at this point, what we're able to do is actually allow the biventricular patient to rest and hopefully that right heart to recover. We wean the ECMO down. We can wean the Impella up as we pull the Impella up, as long as our flows maintain. Now we're going to have the opportunity to actually be able to decannulate our ECMO and allow the left heart, if the right heart is recovered enough, allow the right heart the left heart to continue to rest and recover while we actually get this patient up and we're able to ambulate that patient, which is, as we know, is so important to be able to walk around and get that cardiac rehab. I think this is a really fun app. If you don't have it, just go in and you can get it from your iPad, and it has a computer version as well. So again, Impella helps to reverse that loading effect of ECMO. It's one of the techniques that's available to practitioners to be able to unload the LV. In particular, where I feel that this comes in and is effective is when we're talking about an LV infarct patient that has right-sided failure secondary to the left heart. This is, I think, when our whole ECpella strategy really shines, because you can allow the patient to rest, the right heart to recover, and then decannulate your ECMO, which will decrease your adverse events that we can have with our VA ECMO. There's a lot of studying and papers and stuff going on right now that shows the increase in survival for these types of patients, and there's more and more needed to be done because we have more ECMO going on now and we have more Impellas going on. So we're seeing more and more of this kind of thing being researched. There's data coming in all the time. Here's your Impella patient who's actually ambulating with this patient had a ECMO as well and is being able to ambulate. There's something else that's on the Impella screen, which is called the advanced metrics. This is a really interesting and helpful tool because this allows the practitioner to be able to, as they're weaning ECMO and turning up the Impella, they're able to actually watch the patient's heart, their mean arterial pressure, their end diastolic pressures, their total cardiac output and their native output and the Impella. Watch how those flows. Is the heart actually receiving the volume and doing what it's supposed to do? Is this a patient that's actually being able to wean? Is it time to wean? Can we take our devices out? So this is a really helpful tool. It's called the advanced metrics, and it helps us to be able to wean if we're doing anything, if we're actually being effective. And finally, just finishing off, is that the company's actually put out what we call an Impella update now, which is the use of Impella along with ECMO, in talking about that it is improving the outcomes. As a matter of fact, Abiomed has purchased an ECMO device called Breathe, which is going to be coming out with its 510(k) approval, and it's actually designed for the patient to be able to be mobile with ECMO, and who knows, maybe we'll be pushing Breathe along with an Impella console down the hall, hopefully. That won't be, it'll be easy to do, and we'll be able to recover those patients. So that's all that I have. If anybody has any questions afterwards, happy to talk about it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's a fantastic presentation, and I really value your years of experience, expertise. And I know the other day when we were chatting on the phone, you were sharing with me some of the stuff that you've seen over the years. And I've been a CVICU nurse for 8 years, so you far surpass me in that aspect. So
well, when Florence Nightingale and I were back at the bedside putting in these.
So thank you so much for sharing and just imparting to us truly valuable information. I appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and move into a time of questions and answers. So if you have a question for anybody who has presented today, from Julie's not here, but Carrie and her husband Jeremy, Greg, Enrico, and Billy, or for Caitlin and I. She and I work together as ECMO clinicians at the bedside with patients, hands-on with the pump and the patient, doing whatever we can to save lives and mobilize people and comb their hair out and brush their teeth and everything that we can do on a practical level. So does anybody have any questions? I'm looking in the chat. I don't see any. I guess we covered it all. Everything
I've got a question.
that nobody has any questions. Do you have something to say, Greg?
I have a question for Billy.
Billy?
Yeah, I don't think that we've seen anybody really use Impella and wean from ECMO to Impella, at least at my hospital. How do you guys prevent? How does that prevent north-south syndrome if you have two flows going against each other like that?
Sure. And so that's a really good question. It's a matter of being able to be careful with the amount of flow that you're asking from the Impella. We turn the Impella flows way down, right? And so you've got your ECMO flows, running anywhere from 3 to 5 liters. The Impella flows will be running as low as you can possibly run. Remember, all we're trying to do is to allow that LV not to be distended and not to have blood stasis and back up into the lungs. So in the patients that I see do best, and this is actually, I think some of the first people who started to do this and had some success with this was Danny Ramsey out in Los Angeles, and that team out there. What they would do is just go ahead and place the Impella axillary and then allow, particularly when we had a right heart secondary to left heart failure, allow that right heart to recover, which anywhere from 2 to 4 days, allow that right heart to recover. And we would actually turn down ECMO, turn up the Impella, as long as the Impella would maintain flows as we're coming down on the ECMO. Without suction alarms and have the appropriate flows, that's how we would know that the right heart, of course, echo as well, that the right heart was able to sustain itself, and in which case we'd be able to explant the ECMO. But it's been a strategy that has actually been very successful with those particular patients. There's a lot of reasons patients get ECMO, VA ECMO, and particularly in transplant centers and bridge to decision. So, but in that right heart secondary to left heart failure, this really seems to be a shining moment with that marriage between ECMO and Impella or ECpella.
Awesome.